telling me how my story is supposed to go. Nah, I'm gonna do my own thing.
All stations, stop Spider-Man.
You? Me?
I want to go ahead and I want to get to my review for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, chat, which is the latest chapter in the Spider-Verse saga, which I imagine is going to be going on for a long time, especially based on the box office predictions for this movie. It looks like it's going to be a huge commercial success, along with obviously already being a critical success. But for those that don't know, kind of the general plot synopsis of this film, after reuniting with Gwen Stacy, a Spider-Woman, Brooklyn's full-time new friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Miles Morales, is catapulted across the multiverse, where he encounters a huge team of spider people who are charged with protecting the multiverse's very existence. Additionally, Miles Morales must face a new villain, the Spot, who plans to destroy everything he holds dear. You know, before jumping into this movie, I did want to talk about just, my overall thoughts on, I guess, the Spider-Man in film and in animation, and obviously the original Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, many people, especially my generation, chat, millennials, I just, grew up with numerous Spider-Man, adaptations. Long before we got the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, so I had, of course, the 90s animated Spider-Man series, Spider-Man Amazing Friends before that in the 80s, and, of course, like the original 60s, animated Spider-Man. Those are the ones that I watched, growing up. And then, eventually when they did, that first 2002 film with Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire, Willem Dafoe. I mean, it was a revelation. It was huge. It was like, to me, that was like, this is the biggest movie of all time. Like, I can't, like, nowadays, it's like, well, yeah, of course, we were doing all sorts of adaptations of superheroes, but it's like, that was, like, really special. In much the same way as, like, Batman 1989 was for a lot of people, like, Gen X, and before, like, they can't believe they're making, like, an actual, quote-unquote, dark, gritty take on the Dark Knight, on Batman. That was kind of, what they did with Spider-Man. It's like, wow, I can't believe they did for the most part, a really accurate adaptation of this, beloved character, of the defining character, I would say, of Marvel Comics. Much the same way that, maybe Batman is pretty much the face of DC. I would say, Spider-Man is still to this day the face of Marvel. And we've gotten a lot of great adaptations of Spider-Man. We've gotten some disappointing adaptations of Spider-Man, chat, but I would say we're definitely in a just kind of like a golden age, at least in terms of adaptations of Spider-Man content. Maybe not so much the comics anymore, because I've not been a fan of the comics for quite some time, and they're making some decisions which I don't feel like are adding to the character. But the shows and many of the movies, I feel like they have been contributing in a very positive way. And, more recently, obviously, one of those positive contributions, I feel like, just to the history of Spider-Man, not only Peter Parker, but to the character Miles Morales, it was the original Into the Spider-Verse film, which, listen, I'll admit, going to that movie, I just didn't know what to expect. I had very low expectations at that point. I mean, still to this day, I have very low expectations of Sony and Amy Pascal and Tom Rothman and Avi Arad, and like, oh, we're just doing an animated Spider-Man film. Okay, whatever. It just feels like there's going to be another cash grab. Going to be another Venom or whatever, something like that, right? Or some of the more disappointing Spider-Man films which they had done, a few years ago. Not the Tom Holland films, but I was expecting not to be as thoroughly entertained as I was by the actual film. And, like many people, I saw the movie and I was blown away by it. I couldn't believe how great it was and how refreshing the animation style was, which is now really started to proliferate. Yeah, we're seeing it both in film, obviously things like Mitchell's Little Machines and Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and even that animation style kind of inspiring things like Arcane to a degree. And we're going to continue to see more of it, but that first Spider-Verse movie, it's fantastic. It's a great introduction to Miles Morales, especially for the mainstream who might have been unfamiliar with him, because he is a recent creation, Chad, in the last maybe a little over 10 years, 10 to 12 years now. want to say he was created by Brian Michael Bendis, of course. I want to say in like 2010, 2011, when in the Ultimate Spider-Man verse, Peter died, and he created that character. And since that time, Miles has, I think, been one of Marvel's greatest recent creations. And I feel like for a lot of people, their first exposure to him was, in the movie. And what a fantastic introduction. Just a great film. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's their favorite Spider-Man movie. And maybe it's not my favorite, but I completely understand that it is a number of people's favorites, and it is a fantastic film. And yeah, definitely one of the best movies of the 2010s. And just one of the best superhero films of all time, like no doubt about that. And so that's what kind of brings us to this, this film, to this movie. Going into the movie, I was just as excited as anyone else, who loved, or even if they didn't love, who liked, the first film. I had my initial reservations about the original movie, like I said, but I was happily proven wrong about that film, and was excited to see the filmmakers expand on this world that they created. And with this sequel, I would say the filmmakers have delivered an emotional story, an emotional film with an extremely ambitious story, complete with stunning and even at times, sometimes overwhelming animation sequences. And also just a huge cast of characters who are all very distinct and charismatic in their own ways. Though I do think this film has a few pacing issues, particularly in the first third. It acts, I think, as a very compelling second chapter in this trilogy, what's probably going to be a saga now. I mean, I think they've already green-lighted another spin-off film, which maybe was going to focus on Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen chat. So it ain't over. It ain't going to be just a trilogy, believe me. They're going to keep making these movies. They're going to be pumping out these movies for quite some time, I have no doubt. The one thing that I feel like that really comes across with this film is just how confident it feels. It doesn't immediately feel like, I just noticed this in the beginning, especially in the first third. It doesn't immediately feel the need to jump into the main story. It just doesn't do that immediately. It takes its time, I would say, to flesh out a number of the characters, both from the past film and also new ones they introduce here. Particularly with Gwen Stacy as Spider-Man. In like the initial 20 or so minutes, it's kind of her movie in the first, nearly half hour. And then it takes its time, I think, after that, with showcasing Miles Morales' life as Spider-Man and as a struggling student, as a son who's kind of caught in between these, two worlds of trying to appease his parents, trying to be the son that they want him to be, trying to be the student, also trying to be, as he likes to say, Brooklyn's one and only Spider-Man. It's the kind of storytelling to me that indicates that the filmmakers, the writers and the directors, producers, were just kind of given carte blanche, clearly from Sony, to do anything that they wanted to do. And I would say it mostly works, with a couple of hiccups. Again, I do feel like some of the pacing is off initially in the first third of the film, but so much of it is spectacular. Chat is very, very well made. Other than Miles and Gwen, who are great, and I want to get into more on them just a bit. And again, they are very much the leads of this particular movie. Maybe more so Miles, but certainly Gwen. Gwen gets a lot more screen time here than she did in the original film. We get a number of standouts with the new and returning cast. Obviously, the one I know a lot of people were excited for was, of course, Oscar Isaac as Miguel O'Hara. At least a version of Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. Unlike a lot of the Spider people that we've seen in a lot of the, just past Spider-Man films in general, Spider-Man has, always been a very comedic character. Spider-Woman's always been a very comedic character. Not Miguel O'Hara. He is serious. He is stoic, and he has a lot of resentment. He's racked with anxiety and guilt, and he doesn't cover it up with humor. I kind of appreciate that because he stands out among a lot of other Spider people that we've seen in the past, and certainly in this movie. And I was going to say Oscar Isaac, I think does a great job of voicing this character. There's a sadness to him, but there's definitely a viciousness, a constant danger. You don't want to get on this guy's bad side in any capacity, But a lot of that comes from just tragedy, with him. And he acts as, indicated by the trailer, he acts as a really captivating and compelling antagonist, in the movie. But we also have other Spider people. Isaiah Ray, who's been popping up in things, I would say, for the last 10 or so years. She plays a variation of Jessica Drew, the original Spider-Woman. Here she is like this kind of motorcycle expert. And it was also kind of unique that they made her pregnant. It was just like, well, pregnant women can, fight crime too. They can, superheroes can have children. That's the other thing about this movie too. We'll get into a bit, but I love that because in the comics, it's like no superheroes can have any children. They can't have families. They can't have wives. They can't have sons or daughters. And I kind of like that, in this movie, it's like, of course they can. Of course they can have families. It's difficult. It's challenging. It's hard. But I kind of like that. It's like, yeah. And then in this version of Spider-Woman, Jessica Drew, she's pregnant. And she talks about that and how she wants a family. And it's like, I thought that was cool. And she brings a lot. She's one of those other leader-esque characters, kind of right beside Miguel O'Hara's Spider-Man 2099, who has like a leadership position within this, interdimensional traveling Spider-Verse society. And I like her. And she's, I think, an especially great rapport with Haley Steinfeld's Gwen Stacy, who I'll get into just a bit. But, great new additions. We have Daniel Kaluuya, who is, to me, one of the big standouts of this movie. For people that might be unfamiliar with Daniel Kaluuya, he's been popping up, I would say, for the last 5 or 6 years. Probably best known for his a role in Jordan Peele's Get Out, played the character of Christopher Washington. Here he plays the character of Hobby Brown, who is Spider-Punk from the comics. This, Cockney accented, guitarist, rock and roll star who is, very much against going against the society. He's you can almost describe him as an anarchist. Also, his we'll get in the animation a bit. His animation style is really, really cool. He really stands out among all of the other kind of Spider people in this movie. He reminds me of like Newspaper constantly, just like his whole look. It has that kind of same feel and look to it. And I think a lot of people just forget Daniel Kaluuya because he does such a great. He's one of those actors. He's one of those British actors that just nails an American accent. You can even tell that he's actually British. And when he comes in there with that Cockney accent, it's like, oh wow, yeah, I forgot he's he's British. And he's like one of my absolute favorite characters in this movie because he lives up to his name, Spider-Punk, chat. And I love how the film kind of makes you feel a certain way about him initially, but then you're like, oh, this guy's a good person. And I really, really loved him. He's like one of my favorite new characters in this movie. Just every time he would pop up, they were doing something interesting with him visually or with just his character in general. And he actually has a couple of good moments with Miles as well. Really, really loved him. Outside of kind of like the new Spider people that we see, we have a new villain. I mean, this film actually has several villains, but the main villain which they've kind of been focusing on is Jason Schwartzman as the Spot. And listen, I've been reading Spider-Man comics for years, and I remember like the Spot way back in the day. And the Spot's like, I want to say he's like from the 1970s, and he's this, as they kind of describe initially in the movie, this villain of the week. He's a D-list Spider-Man villain. He's kind of a goof. And, they initially play him up that way in the film. And Jason Schwartzman, who has been in numerous movies for how many decades now, Chad? 30 years at this point? He does such a great job with this character, especially in the beginning when he's, being more comedic. But there is a turn for him that is really creepy and really disturbing. And, I never thought they would have said this, chat. They make the Spot horrifying in this. They make him very, very scary. His power set is interesting. And also kind of gross. It's very kind of, I would compare it to something like, David Cronenberg's The Fly. There's a lot of body horror with the Spot. And you kind of initially feel sorry for him. And I don't want to say too much, but his character connects with some things of the past that I thought was like really, really goes like, oh, that's what he's from. Oh, that's brilliant. All that is handled well, but then like when he makes a certain turn in the movie and where he becomes very competent and truly terrifying, he's like, wow. What they're setting him up for, what they do with him. He could be like one of the truly great, on-screen Spider-Man villains. Chad, I absolutely loved what they did with the Spot, and again, it makes me. I just appreciate they didn't go with like, your typical Spider-Man villains like we've kind of seen time and time again. Not that I dislike them, not that I, dislike the Green Goblin or Doc Ock or whoever, but it was like, hey, let's just take this character that, first of all, most people in the mainstream have no idea even fucking exists, and let's just have fun with them. Let's take what works about them and expand on that and give them, more dimension. And they're making them so they're not just a one-dimensional villain of the week type of character. It's like, no, this is a serious individual, and what their plan is kind of scary and terrifying and very personal, and it really raises the stakes. And I'm like, I like that they did with this kind of forgotten Spider-Man character outside of, the hardcore fan base that has been reading comics for years. So really love what Jason Schwartzman brought to the role of his voice acting, and also just the animation with him is fantastic. But then, of course, again, Chad, we have the return of a number of other characters from the first film. Shamik Moore, I believe that's how you say his name. He does such a fantastic job voicing Miles Morales. He makes the characters. So I think for just, for a lot of people and for generations afterward, I know that they're allegedly Sony is working on some sort of live action Miles Morales film, which, they should. No doubt. I want to see that character make his live action debut. But, for a lot of people, this is going to be, a lot of kids, this is going to be their Spider-Man. And what they give to him, and through his performance, he just provides his character with so much depth, and makes him so interesting, and you want to follow him, and you cheer for him throughout this entire movie. Again, like Peter Parker before him, we see that struggle, that internal struggle with being Spider-Man, also wanting this other life at the same time, and how they do with it. They do that with him as well, but it's new, it's refreshing, and I really like that. We get a lot more with Haley Steinfeld's Gwen Stacy. Like I said, the movie opens up with it. Like the first 20 minutes are really focused on her, I would say, and what her life is like, and and we see more of what happened to her, Peter Parker, and her relationship, what her relationship was like with him, and how that kind of leads to this like huge wedge between her and her father, Captain, George Stacy. And she's just dealing with a lot and stress, and how she just kind of wants to escape this life, and how they kind of present her. It's interesting. It's her relationship with Miles. It gets far more complicated than obviously than initially was in the first film, and how it's being perceived in the trailers. And I like that. I love that they were like, hey, it's not going to be. It's like all hunky dory and lovey dovey. It's like, no, they're going to be put to the test. And I thought that was really good. And this Gwen Stacy, this Spider Woman. I know she's called Spider Gwen, obviously in the comics, but this Spider Woman variant is great. And the first 10 or 15, or I think it's more like 15 minutes of this movie is focused on her, and I'm like, this almost feels like almost like a demo reel for what's probably going to happen, a upcoming Spider-Gwen movie, a Spider-Woman animated film, because they've always said they're going to do a spinoff with a female-centric character. I'm like, well, clearly it's going to be her. They do such a great job with her. She's great. And her whole rapport, especially with Miles, it's really cute and adorable to watch. But it's complicated. It's very complicated. And then again, we have the return of some other characters, like Jake Johnson. He is back as Peter B. Parker, the kind of wannabe, schlubby mentor to Miles. I'll let people know he is not in the movie as much as he was obviously in the original film. He comes in a lot later. And obviously, we see that he is growing, and he's really excited about, it's not a spoiler, but in the trailers, he's shown to be a father. He has Mayday Parker, which is one of my favorite, Spider-Woman variants, Spider-Girl. I own a number of issues. I love Spider-Girl, love Mayday Parker. And they do some fun stuff with him. He's trying to be the best dad. Possibly he's excited about being a dad, again, but he's still kind of a schlub. which is what I think we all want. But Jake Johnson, who's just made a career out of doing that, and he's like kind of perfectly cast as that Spider-Man. Like everyone wants sad dad Spider-Man. There you go. Although he's not that sad. He's kind of sad, but not completely sad, yeah, because he's getting a lot of his life together, and that's exciting to see. And he's still trying to mentor Miles, despite being as flawed as any other Spider-Man is. But he's in the movie, but he's just not nearly in it as much as the first film. And listen, again, there is just so many other Spider-Man variant. Karan Sony, which you guys probably best know him for playing Dopender from Deadpool. He voices, I guess, Spider-Man India, I guess I would say, where it's this world where the dominant culture is pretty much India. And he does a terrific job. And that kind of goes into, eventually does much about like the animation. But he's figured everything out. Like his version of Spider-Man is like, I have a great relationship with my family. I have a girlfriend. Her dad and I are kind of weird, but it's great. He seems like I'm able to do everything. But as we see in the movie, it's even a struggle for him, and there might be some tragedy. And I liked it. And again, his interactions with Spider-Gwen and Miles in particular, like really stand out to me. Really loved his performance. Yeah, the chai tea bit. There's a lot. That's the other thing. The humor in this movie, I would say it is not. It's funny. It definitely has a lot of funny moments in it, but I think it's far more serious than the original. And listen, this is a tired comparison, but it is very much the Empire Strikes Back of this trilogy, of this saga. It's a very dark middle chapter, especially in the last, in the next 2/3 of the movie. Like the first third's kind of like a lot of setup, a lot of time, just establishing what happened to Miles, what happened to Gwen, some of these new Spider people. And the next 2/3, it gets really dark and really twisted. And it's like, how certain things present itself is not really what's actually going on. It's like it's far deeper and more disturbing, and then there, and that's the other thing. There's like a huge cliffhanger in this movie. It for those of you thinking, I was like, I'm going to get like a complete story with this film, like the original one, which is, as that first one just kind of stands alone, right? It's not like you're waiting for of course you're anticipating a sequel like we all were, but it's like, that was a complete story. This one's not a complete story. And that might rub people the wrong way. There's actually a lot of moments in the movie where this movie feels like it kind of has like 5 endings. It kind of has a little bit of a Lord of the Rings problem where it's like, we're ending it right here. So we're going to end. It's like, oh no, we're going to keep going. It's like, well, this clearly is how we're going to end the movie. This is how we're going to end it. It's like, we're still going. Okay. It kind of has like 4 faux endings, and then we finally get like the real ending. I was like, okay, that worked, but they literally could have ended the movie like 4 different times and been like, okay, another cliffhanger, because it ends. Listen, this film ends on a big cliffhanger. Like the central conflicts in this movie, they're not resolved, and I think for a lot of people, I don't know, I shouldn't say a lot, but I think for some people that might go like, you gotta wait. Again, it's not a long wait. The movie, I think, comes out next March, I believe. So it's not too long. But if you're going in there thinking, hey, you're going to see a complete standalone, sequel to the original movie, it's not that. 2 other things I wanted to bring up before kind of wrapping up this review. The animation is absolutely gorgeous. They play with so many styles in this movie. Like the initial one that we see is like, Gwen Stacy's world, which I would say the predominant colors are like pink and green and like, purple. Just like all the buildings and the aesthetics and the rooms and everything, like the skyline, it's all predominantly those 3 colors. And it just, like her world, like all the worlds really stand out, but that's the first one we're introduced to. And like everything kind of looks like a swirl. Like anytime they cut to a character, even though they're like in a specific room, they'll like change the background behind them, and they'll have like certain imagery or colors like represent their emotion or their like demeanor at that moment, right? And so at one point, you'll be having this conversation between, for example, like Gwen and her father, and it starts out kind of like wholesome and it's like a father-daughter relationship, and so like the colors are kind of like popping in the background, like these almost like amorphous blobs, right, of pink and blue and green. But then eventually, like when the conversation gets like really serious, it gets like a little more violent behind them. Like really sharp, hard edged lines start appearing. It's like, yeah, it's interesting. Like animation choice, design choice. And then there'll be like scenes where, for example, maybe they're revealing something to each other, they're being honest, and there'll be like these huge kind of like sparks of light. Like it's like they're realizing what this person is saying to them and what that means. And it's like, boo. It's like they always have like a visual behind them during conversation, especially in Gwen's world. And then we go to, for example, like Spider-Man India, and it's like everything's clearly based on like Indian culture. It's like, what if Manhattan was in India? And that's what we see. And they have some great gags in there too, but that really pops up. And there's like a lot of deep, rich, warm colors, like a lot of reds, a lot of oranges, a lot of yellows. All that like really, really pops. And they'll have like, that'll be the backgrounds, but then they'll have like the characters wear these like blues, right? Or these green, these like cooler colors against like the warmer backgrounds, right? And so like everything like, whoa, it just stands out. And then you'll go to like the 2099's world, and it's like this idyllic looking utopia. At least that's initially what it looks like, right? Where it's all, white, ivory-esque, almost plasteel buildings, right? But then you might go to the subterranean levels and it looks very different. And so it's like each world, they were very careful, like, hey, let's make these all very distinct from each other. You'll go to a world where you have things that are like predominantly where it's like purple and green and it's neon. You'll go to like a neon world and it has that look and it's a little more dystopian-esque, right? And I was like, wow, this is really cool, But at the same time, it's like, I could see for a lot of people, this might be like super overwhelming. It's like it's sensory overload. Like I can't think of another animated film, with maybe the exception of, again, more recent stuff that uses animation style, like Mitchell's vs. the Machines and Spider-Verse. Maybe Puss in Boots, but to a much lesser degree. That has this kind of art style that's just super experimental and just pops. I mean, they throw a lot at you, and sometimes you'd be like, Jesus Christ. And you're going to miss a lot. On your first viewing, you're just going to be missing a lot of stuff in the background. They have a ton of just gags and sight gags in this movie. But again, that also then provides, hey, another reason for you to go back and watch the film, right? But I really love the color palette. But I can see where it could be kind of like, it was just kind of like too much at once for some people. Like, I understand that, but it was pretty imaginative, pretty spectacular. There's nothing really like it aside from maybe, again, Mitchell's vs. Machines and the original Spider-Verse. The score and the soundtrack are fantastic. Like they use a lot of music that just kind of defines each character, both already established songs, but then the score of this film is just great. They use just a lot of, I don't know, I would describe just as environmental sounds, There's a lot of, listen, I'm a sucker for synth, as you guys know. There's a lot of synthwave in this score and soundtrack, and I'm like, yeah. And so it really, really worked to me. And it's the kind of synth where it's both like, whoa, it's like amazing, it's spectacular, it's just wow, right? But then they'll have it where it's like really threatening and ominous, and it's really just setting up like the stakes. So they do a great job, just creating a tone, right? It helps establish the setting, a sense of awe, but also a sense of danger, through its music, right? But yeah, it's in terms of just like kind of wrapping up my final thoughts. One of the things that I think I kind of appreciated this movie the most, even though it's I feel like some of the pacing might be off. This is the type of animated film that doesn't feel like it's for kids. It's like it has humor, sure. It has funny moments, but there's just so many scenes in this movie where it's like in an animated film where it's literally just the characters talking to each other. We're just sitting down and having conversations. It's not all just, timey-wimey, mumbo-jumbo exposition about interdimensional travel. It's just like people are just talking. And, again, in many foreign countries, especially in the East, especially in Japan and South Korea and many other Southeast Asian countries that have made animated content for decades, Like, they don't view animation as just for children. They view animation as it's just another medium that tells stories. It's for everyone. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can be 5 or you can be 50. You know, it's like, that's what we make it for. It's just a medium that we have. In the West, especially in America, I think there's always been this kind of cultural look at animations, like, well, it's made for children. And look, this is one of those few movies that feels like so much of this feels like it's for adults, you know? Because I was even watching, I'm like, I'm surprised. I'm interested to see how a lot of kids are going to respond to this movie, because of just how it just has such a serious tone, and because it just has so many characters just literally talking to each other about how they're feeling, about their relationships, and what they're going through, their various existential crises, you know? And I wonder if that's going to appeal to kids. I mean, it appeals to me just because I'm like, I feel like animation just shouldn't be a medium that's geared towards a single demographic. It should be, you know, geared towards multiple demographics. And I'm hoping to, even though like it's obviously adult animation is proliferated on television, certainly on streaming. That's where it seems to be at home. It's nice to see a film that feels like, hey, we can tell these adult-esque stories with this medium, and we don't have to constantly just gear everything towards kids, towards children. And I feel like this movie does that a lot. And so I'm curious to see like just how kids' reactions are to this. But yeah, no, this is a very good sequel, even a great sequel. I do feel like it has a couple of pacing issues, certainly in the beginning. It is a long movie. This is currently, I believe, the longest animated film ever produced in the United States. There's definitely longer films that have been made in other countries, foreign animated films. But as far as I know, this is the longest United States made animated film of all time. And it takes its time. And I think that might affect some of the pacing, but I would say the first 2/3 of the movie, or excuse me, the last 2/3 of the film, the majority of the film work really, really well. That first third, although, like, again, it just feels like they're giving carte blanche, establish these characters as much as you want. Maybe you could have cut some things, edited around some things. Maybe you could have picked up the pacing to a degree. But other than that, it's a fantastic movie, and you know, at least in my opinion, right as of right now, one of the best films so far of 2023. You know, it makes me very excited for the inevitable sequel, which comes out very soon. Well, less than a year from now, so we have that to look forward to. I want to see how this story wraps up. They have a huge cliffhanger. Several big cliffhangers. What's going to happen with this character? What's this villain going to do? Oh, we have a whole new element, a new threat added right at the end. So how's that going to play out? Like, all that is just like, it's not resolved. So go into that movie with that in mind, that all the major plot points just are not going to be resolved, okay? It's very much a Empire. Again, I know it's cliche. I know it's kind of trite. This is an Empire Strikes Back-esque movie. In most of the time in the best way possible. But yeah, it's great. It's great. I highly recommend it, chat. And for me, if I were to give this a rating on the Double Toast scale, I think this is a really solid full price film. Full price movie for me for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. But that is just my opinion. What about you guys out there? What did you think of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? Are you fans of the original film? Did you like this movie? What are you looking forward to seeing in an inevitable sequel? I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I want to take the time to tell you about my Patreon, Class in the Glass, which offers hundreds of film commentaries and video reactions to numerous movies, TV shows, and cartoons. If you're a fan of shows like Batman the Animated Series and Avatar: The Last Airbender, or films like Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, my Patreon is the platform for you. Currently, I'm doing a subathon to reach 75 subs on the platform. If we hit 75 subs, we'll be able to start voting on the next edited YouTube reaction, which will include actual clips and scenes from the movies and shows I comment over. Choose from such films as Fire and Ice, Masters of the Universe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, or Spawn. Subscribing at any tier level is appreciated, and feel free to give feedback at any time. Thank you again for watching the video, and see you next time.